Welcome to Deep Dive Devotions, where each day we slow down and dig into one chapter of the Bible, exploring its meaning, its context, and what it shows us about God and His work in our lives. In today's reading from the book of Numbers, chapter 26, we'll see how God prepares His people Israel for the greatest change they've experienced in 40 years, moving from the wilderness to the Promised Land. This chapter kicks off right after a serious plague, specifically the destructive episode at Baal of Peor, where thousands died because of their faithlessness and involvement with idolatry. The plague was a stark, immediate judgment, reminding Israel that God's holiness cannot be trifled with, and it immediately sets the stage for a dramatic shift from punishment to possession. Moses and Eleazar are commanded to take a new census, counting every man 20 years and older who can serve in the army. Notice the spiritual transition here. The old high priest, Aaron, is gone, having died at Mount Hor, and the new spiritual leader, Eleazar, now stands alongside Moses. This passing of the spiritual mantle ensures continuity and underscores that the Lord's authority remains absolute, even when human leadership changes. The census takes place in the plains of Moab, the final encampment before crossing the Jordan, signifying that the period of wandering is officially over and the hour of inheritance is at hand. This census is essentially a sacred roll call for the next generation, establishing not only the new fighting force, but also the generation that is spiritually pure enough to receive God's inheritance. It's important because the previous census, taken 40 years earlier, was entirely wiped out, save for two men. The entire rebellious generation that murmured and doubted God's power to conquer Canaan has now died, demonstrating God's perfect commitment to His word of judgment. Now, as the new list is compiled, it signals a new beginning, a clean slate, with a new generation prepared to undertake the spiritual and military battles necessary to claim their home, placing their faith where their fathers failed. So, as we go through verses 5 through 51, we see the results, tribe by tribe, and it's less about the specific large numbers and more about who is actually left to claim the land, and the continuity of the promise. For instance, the tribe of Reuben is counted, then Simeon, Gad, and so on. The counts reveal both the growth and shrinkage of the tribes over 4 decades, demonstrating that prosperity and consequences are not always distributed evenly. Some tribes, like Simeon, saw massive reductions in number, likely due to their prominent role in the recent sins and the resulting plague at Peor. Their total dropped by over 37,000 men, a shocking decline that serves as a grim numerical consequence, showing a direct link between public, egregious sin and national decline. Their reduced standing at the time of allotment serves as a permanent cautionary tale for all the tribes of Israel. As the text lists the tribes, it drops in historical reminders, which is a big deal for keeping the story straight and teaching the new generation lessons from the past. Right in the middle of counting the sons of Reuben, the text pauses in verse 11 to specifically point out that the sons of Korah did not die when their fathers, Dathan and Abiram, rebelled, and the earth swallowed them. This is a profound moment of pure grace. Korah, Dathan, and Abiram directly challenged Moses and God's established order. Yet when the ground opened up and swallowed the guilty, their children were spared. This stands as a powerful testament to the truth that God can and does preserve a remnant, saving the children from the direct consequence of their parents' sin, and showing that His judgment is never indiscriminate or total. God's justice is always perfectly mixed with mercy. His wrath is specific, and His grace is widespread, offering salvation and a new life to the next generation, even when the previous one failed. The subsequent lineage of the Korahites, in fact, went on to serve as celebrated temple musicians and psalm writers, meaning God took a family on the brink of total annihilation and preserved them to have a holy, central role in Israel's future worship, illustrating the way God resurrects and redeems even the worst situations for his glory. The census continues through the rest of the tribes: Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Manasseh, Ephraim, Benjamin, and Dan, counting hundreds of thousands of men, finally arriving at a total fighting force of 601,730. This new figure is remarkably close to the original census count, 630,550, which is astonishing after 40 years of hardship, warfare, and divine judgment. This stability in numbers testifies to God's preserving hand, keeping the nation intact despite their worst efforts to destroy themselves. It is a miracle of maintenance. After this massive count, God tells Moses exactly why this census was taken, starting in verse 52. The land is going to be divided among these very tribes. The size of the inheritance each tribe gets will be based on the number of people in it. A bigger tribe gets a bigger piece of land, an equitable arrangement that ensures fairness and sustainable occupancy, demonstrating the orderly nature of God's plan for his people, where practical equity is maintained. However, the exact location of that inheritance will be determined by casting lots. Verse 55, showing that while human order, the census and population count is important, it is ultimately divine providence, God's will, that directs the final distribution of the gifts. The casting of lots was not a game of chance, but a solemn act of prayer where the people sought a direct revelation of God's will. The land is a divine gift, and the exact placement is also determined by the giver, removing any room for tribal disputes or political scheming. By using both population size, justice, law, and lots, grace, providence, God ensures the division is both fair and sacred, requiring the people to trust the outcome as his perfect will for their home. The land itself is a type of the ultimate rest and inheritance that God gives to all believers, not based on merit, but purely by his gracious allotment. Following the tribal allotments, verses 57 through 62 then give a separate count for the Levites. They aren't counted with the fighting men because they don't get a territorial tribal inheritance in the land. Their job is to serve the Lord and his tabernacle, making them a holy and set-apart people, a priesthood for the entire nation. Their total came to 23,000 males. Their very existence reminds the other tribes that they are a holy people too, though their holiness is mediated through the Levites. Within this count, the text details the family of Moses himself: Amram, Jochebed, Aaron, and Moses. A brief pause to remind us that even the greatest leaders are rooted in a common lineage and a powerful story: the Levites. Lack of land inheritance doesn't mean they are less blessed. In fact, their inheritance is the Lord himself, and they are sustained by the tithes and offerings of the other tribes and given specific cities to dwell in. This is a profound spiritual model, their dependence on God's direct provision, channeled through the offerings of their brethren, subtly teaches the rest of Israel that their physical labor and material blessing, the land, are meant to support the spiritual work of the nation. The Levites serve as a perpetual, visible sign that Israel is a spiritual kingdom, not merely a political or agricultural one. The final three verses, 63 to 65, deliver the most powerful, almost chilling, conclusion to the story of the wilderness journey. Moses confirms that out of all the men counted in the very first census, not one of them showed up on this new list, except for Joshua and Caleb. This confirms that God's judgment, pronounced 40 years earlier, that the entire rebellious generation would die in the wilderness because of their unbelief, had been completely and perfectly fulfilled. The death of hundreds of thousands of men over 4 decades is a stark reminder of the seriousness of sin and the unwavering nature of God's holiness. His law demanded death, and the law was served exactly as promised. The fact that a new generation, counted and ready to inherit the promise, is now standing there, organized and waiting at the borders of Canaan, speaks volumes about the enduring faithfulness of God. Though he is a God of strict justice who keeps his promises of punishment, he is also the God who preserves a new people through the wilderness, bringing them to the very edge of the promised blessing through sheer, unmerited grace. Joshua and Caleb, the only two men who lived, stand as living monuments to faithfulness and obedience, serving as the necessary bridge between the promise given to Abraham and the promised blessing about to be claimed, emphasizing that the entrance into God's rest is always and only by faith. The chapter closes not on a note of mourning for the dead, but on a note of triumphant new beginnings for the faithful. The wilderness generation is gone, and the covenant generation is ready to march. Thank you for joining me today in God's Word. If this podcast has been helpful to you and you'd like to support it, there's a simple option at ko-fi.com/deepdivedevotions. That's ko-fi.com/deepdivedevotions. Whether you support or simply listen, thank you for being part of this time in Scripture. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.